This will be my final response to the allegations made against me on October 29th, 2024 by my accuser, Coco Kisses. I think enough time has passed where I can give a final response that I can refer to if someone wants a proper statement, as there have been many defamatory statements made against me, and a lot of how this situation was handled was unfortunately out of my control, and by the time I could do anything, the damage had already been done. I want to get this out of the way immediately. If you're from the Dead by Daylight community watching this video is likely not going to be for you, because most of you have already made up your mind before even understanding all the details. I'll explain more about what I mean in the moment, but before doing that, I want to explain how we got here, because I know there are likely people who don't even know what's going on. On October 29th, 2024, someone dropped a series of allegations against me, accusing me of grooming, abuse, and a bunch of other things that have been blown out of proportion. These allegations are vehemently false and were handled very poorly behind the scenes. I'll give a quick TLDR to the events that occurred. If you want a longer and more detailed response to these allegations, I'll leave a link to the original response document down below that I posted. When I was 19 years old, I got into a relationship with someone I met on a mutual Dead by Daylight Discord I was in. I was under the assumption that they were 20 years old, but 3.5 months into the relationship, she called me and told me that this wasn't the case and that she was 16 years old the entire time while I was 19. So a 3-year age gap, to be exact. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I made the best decision to stay in contact with her, being in this perpetual situationship/relationship for the next year afterwards, especially knowing all of this unfolded the way it did. It would have been wise to cut her off and perhaps anyone associated within that circle altogether, but as I said before, allegations of grooming and abuse are completely, and I mean completely, false. But 2.5 weeks after she released her document falsely accusing me of these things, I released a response doc on Twitter, and the Twitter community, specifically Dead by Daylight on Twitter specifically, they didn't receive it very well. Overwhelmingly so. And I think there are many reasons for why this is the case. The first is anchor bias. For those of you who don't know what that is, it is an over-reliance on the first piece of information people hear, regardless of whether or not new information comes out. The first version of events shaped the entire conversation. People were quick to react emotionally, and I get it, the accusations were serious and they're phrased in a particular direction. It's very easy to assume the worst and be uncharitable to that person. Many people often just believe every allegation they hear immediately. They don't ask questions, they don't look at every single detail or possible inconsistencies, and nothing can ever change their mind. It's why I said at the beginning that this video will probably not be for most of the Dead by Daylight community. This leads me to my next point. The person who accused me built connections within the community, even though I had been there prior to her. She also had a history of wedging tons of personal relationships I've had with other people that I would talk to, so her presence at the time was not something I was particularly comfortable with, but something I did have to tolerate because sometimes you have to be in spaces with people you don't like very much. Regardless, her document was planned a little over a week before the actual document released to the public. And slowly but surely, there were content creators and community members distancing themselves from me before the document even released, based on sensationalized allegations they heard from her behind the scenes, where she says in her own document that it was explained truthfully, which it absolutely was not. And when I initially called her out for the specific examples in my response, not a single person even cared to entertain the idea that she could have been possibly lying, or addressed any of the specific examples I gave in the document. This ensured that by the time the allegations had came forward, Coco, my accuser, would be guaranteed the support that she got because an insane amount of planning and orchestration went into it behind the scenes. Priming. The document released against me was framed in such a way that essentially guaranteed that people would feel sympathy for my accuser. It labeled me as manipulative, abusive, and controlling from the start. So by the time I responded, nothing I could say would be taken at face value. People had already been primed to believe that anything I said was just more manipulation. And that's incredibly unfair. Because when you're cast as a villain before you even open your mouth, it's a lose-lose situation. Say nothing? That screams guilt. Respond? It's seen as manipulative. I guess as a bonus reason, I'll just throw this in here, is that Twitter in general is a toxic cesspool, and it's just a disinformation platform. In fact, it actually rewards disinformation. The platform is designed as an outrage machine. The truth generally doesn't matter unless you go out of your way to find it yourself. You can spend hours compiling receipts, context, evidence, so much stuff that disproves the original claims being made, and it still doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things when you have children running the narrative online. And unfortunately, grown adults don't do much to push back against these narratives and will even play into sensationalizing them and making them seem so much worse than they actually are, either because they don't want to be seen bad or because they don't want to lose their audience. But once such narratives are in power, it's an uphill battle to try and even set the record straight, no matter how incorrect it is. And unfortunately, I'd lost my platform. Everything I worked for, gone. Tarnished. A big part of why I went into these spaces was to get away from my accuser, and eventually she wormed her way into those same exact places just to get me canceled. It is not a coincidence that once I exited our old friend group, she stopped hanging out with them nearly as much. I already included this part in my response, but that tells me that her intention with staying in contact in our mutual spaces was actively to drive wedges in relationships I had already established. I lost people I thought were friends. I lost any sense of safety when it came to my presence online, and I was getting nonstop harassment and falsely labeled a pedophile from these accusations. This situation is more complicated than how it was portrayed on Twitter, and it deserves more than a thread of quote retweets and knee-jerk reactions. What I will not fold to is the allegations of grooming abuse, and certainly not pedophilia, and every other sensationalized narrative that this became. If my accuser wanted to say that she felt like the way I acted was shitty, toxic, selfish, and in some ways not good for her mental health, and just other stuff that wasn't what the narrative became, that would have been perfectly valid. And that's not something I'm proud of either. I've tried to improve a lot since then by getting better at regulating my own emotions. But what makes this problematic is all the pushing of a narrative that attached the most damaging labels to me. Labels that I've already debunked with clear evidence in my original response. And despite that, people still didn't believe me or took it seriously because they had already made up their mind and instantly believed every single allegation they read online. There was no grooming here. Full stop. Grooming is a very intentional and insidious process of setting typically a child up for typically sexual exploitation. This could not have been grooming, as it started under the belief that we were adults, and even after finding out, there was no methodical process of setting up for any exploitation. Besides which, the age gap was 3 years. In fact, it was exactly 3 years since we share a birthday. I can understand some people's opinions and how they might think it's a bit odd, and I get that genuinely. But if you think a 3-year age gap on its own is predatory, or you sensationalized it by calling it pedophilia, I honest to God think you should touch grass. It absolutely was not the scandalous age difference that people made it out to be, and I'm going to stand by that. It also could not have been grooming because throughout the entire time of us knowing each other, I expressed a lot of discomfort with what I was involved in. My accuser even includes this in her own document. When she herself talked about how it wasn't a big deal, and from her perspective, based on her own proof, this completely contradicts her extreme narrative of grooming and emotional abuse, especially since the dynamic never began with the intention of getting people to distance themselves from me. In fact, I wanted to tell other people in mutual spaces the truth, but could not because she herself didn't want me to. I was also unable to leave the dynamic because she said that if I wasn't in her life, that she would kill herself. She said this a lot on voice calls as well, so I don't have proof of those, unfortunately. So much so that I actually believed the same thing that she did, that I wouldn't be able to live if she wasn't in my life either. But obviously, that wasn't the case. And like I said, people were sensationalizing this entire situation by calling it pedophilia, which is not only defamatory, but by attaching all these labels, you are harming legitimate victims of pedophilia and grooming, which also is doing a massive disservice to them. People who have been through the horrific harm of childhood sexual abuse. I mean, hell, you had people who were making a mockery out of attaching this label to me, just for artificial internet dunking points. If you actually cared about pedophilia, you wouldn't be having this level of reaction. making a mockery about children essentially getting raped, because that's effectively what pedophilia is. And when you baselessly throw this narrative around just because it makes you feel good on the internet, not because you actually care, it's fucking pathetic, terminally online loser shit. And it gets even more frustrating because you have people sending links to the Center of Exploited and Missing Children. All of this behavior is insulting and diminishing to actual victims of serious issues like grooming and pedophilia. All these people are doing, by desperately virtue signaling to this degree, is telling legitimate victims of grooming, which is a very serious issue, saying, hey, you have more people coming into the support group. I know you were groomed when you were like 13 by a 28-year-old man to do slowly more increasingly sexual acts, and now you have a completely fucked up sense of what consent and sexuality even looks like, but fuck it, move over. I'm joining the club now. I'm in with you. Like, what do you want me to say to that? Those are two different situations entirely. Unfortunately, the internet, specifically people on Twitter more so than anything else, have a massive problem conflating situations and can never meet them where they're at. It's a hyper-toxic culture that obsessively virtue signals about behavior regardless of what level that behavior is at. These are not people who care about victims or are concerned about their well-being. They care about outrage and trying to take down someone else because they want to either platform themselves or simply pass the community's purity test and look good. And Twitter did what Twitter did best by harassing someone they were under the belief was some kind of horrific pedophile that targets kids. These claims are absolutely false. I want to quickly address something before anyone else tries to bring it up against me down the line, just very quickly. The day I released my response, my accuser posted this. It was a private conversation I had with another content creator or community member, someone I trusted because he was one of the few people I confided in about all of this, and he had went through some similar stuff. That trust had clearly been misplaced because now the conversation has leaked. In those messages, I said that it was my accuser who did the grooming, and I want to be very clear about this. That was wrong. The reason I did this was because I had moments where I looked back at the situation from a different lens a year later, and a lot of the manipulative behavior my accuser would exhibit, which I've already shown in the document, seemed very much within the line of what typical grooming behavior would be. She would literally tell me that I couldn't reveal her age to any one of our mutuals at the time, despite me wanting to, because I didn't want to deal with a huge burden on me, especially knowing that she lied about her age to gain access to all these spaces that she currently has access to in the first place. She would say things like I couldn't trust my own family, and that people within my life shouldn't be trusted, just to slowly wedge away at all the relationships in my life. I go more into detail about that in my document if you want to see the proof for that. Regardless, during my time streaming on Twitch, I kept seeing people within my circles saying that grooming could happen at any age and it wasn't just limited to someone younger. That framing made me question what I experienced. I wondered if maybe that word applied to me, but after more time and reflection, I've come to a clearer place. It didn't apply and I shouldn't have used that term, even if I wasn't planning on going public with it. It was a very personal situation and I wanted friends to confide to about it because it was a situation that very much affected me at the time. It still wasn't okay, and this is me admitting that, and I do apologize for misusing that word. I'm a firm believer of using the appropriate definitions of words, and that situation is no different, and I will do better about that going forward. She was manipulative though, and I still stand by that. Her pattern of behavior and screenshots I've shown very much exhibit that, but grooming is a very specific thing, and I don't want to contribute to misusing words, so I think it's important to just address that before people begin bringing it up. There were still some people within the community who were kind enough to understand the nuance of this situation, but still felt pressured to distance themselves from me because of the public perception, and I don't hold it against them as much. I don't see them as the problem. I see them more as a symptom of a bigger problem. In online culture, where silence or neutrality is treated as complicity, and where people are afraid of being associated with the wrong person, constantly being purity tested, that kind of environment doesn't leave much room for nuance, and encourages people to protect themselves at all costs. And the worst part, I was part of the problem. I was once part of this community. I have called out many people while I had my Twitch platform, and I did believe that I was doing the right thing and acting in good faith. I had engaged in a lot of this culture, and that made me just another cog in the machine. The same kind of dogpiling that these online spaces heavily reward. While I do think there were times where some of it was justified, I'm sure there have been a number of times where someone I may have been arguing with or someone I may have been talking with, whether that's on Twitter or just anywhere else in the DVD community, was trying to talk to me in good faith or have an actual discussion, or someone that I may have unfollowed just because I did so impulsively based on word of mouth from other people and what I saw in my feed. And I admit, after facing the same thing, I can kind of understand how they feel now. Which is why when I come back to content creation, and I will come back, more about that later in this video, I don't want to engage in that same kind of dogpiling anymore. It's important to understand a situation with all the information available, and I want to actually look into situations and give an honest take about it while engaging in good faith, not one that's filtered through mob mentality or whatever happens to the most popular opinion at the time. That's the kind of standard we should be holding ourselves to generally. I want to make this part of the video about my accuser's document. Leading up to this document, the original claim as to why she quote-unquote came forward was because I made a simple comment on my stream referencing my past relationship very briefly. It wasn't for too long. It was maybe 2 or 3 minutes. It wasn't that deep. But I'll play the clip now in case you guys missed it. You know, I know I asked this question maybe last stream or the stream before, but 2024, 2.5 months left. How we feeling? How was the year for you? I know a lot of people said that this year was kind of mid. A lot better than 2023. Interesting. Because I know Bleak, I'm sure you know who Bleak is, Diabetic. You've probably seen him on Twitter. First P100 Dracula, all that good stuff. Bleak said that this year was very mid. That it was a very, very mid year overall. Best year of my life thus far. Holy shit. Wow, okay, a lot of people really loved this year. Holy. 2023 was not a good year. Interesting. I actually was pretty satisfied with the way 2023 went for me personally. I definitely struggled with some mental health stuff in 2023, but I'm satisfied with it. I mean, I got out of a... Is that even an appropriate topic on stream? I don't think I can... I'm not gonna talk about it on stream. I'm not gonna talk about it. I guess if you know about 2022, you know about it, I guess. If you know, you know. Close friends of mine know about it. If you know, you know. But yeah, it's 2022 was not a good year for me. So the year after, 2023, it was just nice. It was refreshing after a not so great year. And then this year was kind of, I don't know, to me this year kind of felt like filler, to be honest. I'd say some of the highlights this year though are probably some of the film sets I worked on, and then I guess secondhand fun that I got from everyone being at TwitchCon. I'm supportive. Fuck 2022. 2022 was garbage. It's probably the worst year of my life. I'm gonna be honest with you. It was I got out of a nasty relationship, okay? I'll just say that. I don't think I can say more than that on stream, to be honest, but I got out of a pretty fucking nasty relationship. Anyways, music sounds better with you. Let's go. But yeah, that's really the gist of it. 2022 was also the year I got out of a nasty relationship, so holy shit, wow, I guess I'm not the only one. I don't want to, yeah. Damn, wow, this stream took stream topics took a turn, huh? Yeah, I don't know. I can't really say much beyond that, to be honest with you. It's just, it was only a passing reference, and yes, I did confide to people behind the scenes about it, as I stated in the clip. And that alone was enough for her to come forward to content creators behind the scenes, and these people were choreographing the actual Google Doc against me. This means one of two things happened behind the scenes. One, the content creators and community members behind the scenes heard a very sensationalized version of the events that occurred and genuinely felt terrible for her. Or two, some of them were complicit in helping her, knowing that it was sensationalized, and I wouldn't doubt that one of them in particular was biased towards it because they were closer friends with my accuser, and also because she was an emo artist and provided assets to him and people that he personally knew. Whatever the case was, this was handled very recklessly and poorly. Because this entire thing was a calculated hit piece. That was what my accuser always intended it to be, was a calculated hit piece, as she even admits herself in her own document. The timeline throughout the document is always changing and contradicting itself. There were many lies told, most of which I have already addressed in my response document. She also has a huge history of burning relations with people that no longer serve a purpose to her, as one of her best friends for a long time stuck around her and stuck her neck out for these false claims, who I actually showed earlier in this video, falsely calling me a pedophile, and was part of this malicious smearing of my name. These people are no longer friends now. It's very ironic to see someone virtue signal so hard, practically kissing her ass just for some Twitter likes, only for her to get burned by that same person. I'd like to think that that's poetic justice, but that's neither here nor there. Regardless, my accuser shielded behind very serious allegations of grooming, which is harmful to legitimate victims who have gone through childhood sexual abuse. To use it as a weapon to cancel someone and then proceed to kickstart her own career with these claims is disgusting and insulting to those people. There's hardly any sense of proportionality on the internet anymore. The moment a serious label is present, or any label for that matter, context, nuance, and intent, and all the details that are very relevant to the story just go out the window. It's crazy because many people within the Dead by Daylight community are very progressive, and a huge part of being progressive is believing in things like accountability with charitability, criminal justice reform, and having the correct level of punishment applied to whatever action occurred. Proportionality being added to the equation. For example, many progressive people advocate for alternatives to incarceration, second chances, and rehabilitative approaches over punitive ones, especially for marginalized groups. Hell, even situations regarding murder. But the moment it comes to someone on the internet or in the Dead by Daylight community who don't necessarily act perfectly, suddenly they need to lose their platform, due process as well as the proper checks and balances get melted away, and pretty much their entire reputation gets tainted. And as I said before, I was also part of that problem at one point. But this double standard is fucking outlandish, and I'm not saying conservatives aren't guilty of it either. You could even argue they're more guilty of it than progressives are. But it's especially problematic for progressives to do because they have all these beliefs that are just conflicting with each other, and no one seems to care about their own fucking values anymore. If you don't slightly align with any of their beliefs, you're cast out immediately as irredeemable. It becomes less about values and more about ideological correspondence. And I said earlier in this video, I was part of that problem, which in some cases, like I said, I'm not proud of, but I also believe that it does need to change. For this segment, I want to talk about online culture and how, unfortunately, platforms like Twitter are just hot take machines that reward online vigilantism and incessantly attacking people regardless of whether or not a story is true or has nuance to it. I do believe that there was a shift in 2020 during COVID specifically where people became more aware of serious social topics like sexual assault, grooming, pedophilia, and a whole bunch of other important social conversations that needed to happen, which are all very serious issues and are important things to be more focused on, as there weren't enough people speaking up for it back in the day. Unfortunately, and I notice this a lot in the online spheres far more than in the real world, the narrative about sexual assault, grooming, and pedophilia has gone too far. It's gone so far to the point where we canceled 19-year-olds for talking to 17-year-olds and that their platform needs to be taken away, and that they're the most horrific kind of human being to exist ever. And that on its own could be considered grooming to people now. That's grooming. Normal relationships, a 19-year-old talking to a 17-year-old, that's considered fucking grooming to people now, apparently. And yet, on the same coin, they'll infantilize 18 and 19-year-olds who by this point are legal adults, and as a result, people will eat up these allegations and push narratives that they were groomed. It's fucking insanity. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who mean well when they talk about these things. I'm not saying those people don't exist, but it is dangerous to just take an allegation at face value without hearing all the information about a story. And it feels like people care more about how it looks to them rather than actually finding a solution to it. Bad faith actors are rewarded for spewing false information and carefully crafted tabloids, and this situation is no different. Unfortunately, my name has suffered irreparable damage as a result of this situation, and I don't think it'll ever be the same again. And I know people are going to try and attack, twist, and virtue signal, probably screenshot this video, post it on Twitter, pretend like they know what they're talking about, if it means looking good to their peers, or if they can capitalize off of it. These are not people who care about victims. These are not people who care about social issues. These are not people who even want to make solutions to these problems. They just want to look good in front of their peers and gain clout, even if it means not verifying all the information piece by piece. It is very sad to know that false and sensationalized allegations have probably affected more people than we realize. They are a very real and very dangerous thing, no matter how much people want to think the opposite, or people want to claim that they are a quote-unquote rare occurrence. There are legitimate victims of grooming and sexual assault that deserve to be heard, and when people take justice into their own hands just because they want to platform themselves or look good in front of people, it is very harmful not just to those people accused, but to people actually coming forward about real stories. This kind of behavior can destroy lives. And if this online culture doesn't shift, or we keep operating under guilty until proven innocent, there will only continue to be more reckless situations to come. If you are a legitimate, keyword, legitimate victim of grooming, sexual assault, or abuse, you deserve to be heard. There will be resources I'll leave in the description below. File a police report. At the very least, it'll provide professionals actual resources and a paper trail that could prevent the culprit from enacting further harm onto others. I understand why people are sensitive to these topics for good reason, but sensitivity and accountability must go hand in hand with accuracy and integrity. When I had my platform on Twitch, I had just hit 800 followers, and I had several plans lined up for my future endeavors on Twitch, and even before I started streaming on Twitch as well. Most of these opportunities have now been forever tarnished and missed as a result of this entire debacle and these false allegations, with my accuser in a very calculated manner wedging relationships between me and other people over and over and over again the past several years. And I have very good reason to believe, with evidence in my original document, that was the goal of her releasing the document. Not because it came from a place of being victimized or because she was a legitimate victim, but because she weaponized and hid behind the serious claims of grooming just so she could get me canceled. She even admits this in her document. So that's it. That's all I have to talk about. I've been very transparent on this topic and haven't omitted any details regarding this situation. I'm done letting this situation control me. I'm done letting these sensationalized narratives hold the power of everything related to me. And I'm done letting my accuser manipulate the narrative. I'm going to fight to clear my name, not for or in the Dead by Daylight community, but for myself and the new content I plan on making. If you're interested in seeing this new kind of content I'm making, I'll leave a link to my new channel in the description below. I already know people are going to have a problem with this video regardless of what I respond with because they just want to double down on their confirmation bias, but the worst has already happened, and this video exists to set the record straight, properly. Sorry, not gonna let a toxic relationship within a 3-year age gap ruin my life anymore. I've linked my original response to this situation below if you want to read a more in-depth coverage on everything. I still stand by most of what I said in that document. I've never been as manipulative or as bad faith as people are recklessly claiming. I'm not saying anything more about any of this. You either believe me or you don't. Like I said, I have a link to my new YouTube channel in the description, and I plan on coming back to content creation. It's going to be completely different and unrelated to Dead by Daylight gaming. The content will be on my own terms, and it's going to be back at square one. So, thank you for listening to my side of the story, and I'll see you then.